Children who grew up after this pandemic will wonder what it was like to be alive when most of the world shut down. They will wonder why their parents and grandparents sing little 20-second songs while they wash their hands. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. They will wonder why Grandma and Grandpa still wash their groceries and wear masks to the store, even though it's been decades since COVID-19 shut down the world. They will wonder what it was like when strangers used to shake hands instead of bumping elbows or bowing slightly to greet each other. They will wonder what it was like before distance learning and work from home became commonplace. They will wonder if you were one of those unsanitary people who didn't wash your hands every time, all the time, until a pandemic made it absolutely necessary. They will wonder if you were one of those plague vectors who still went to house parties and social gatherings, even as most of your neighbors and some of your science-minded politicians tried to flatten the curve. They will wonder if you lived in one of those states or nations where even the so-called leaders didn't take the pandemic seriously. They will wonder what you did during the long first quarantine that they call the Great Pause, and the many next pauses that followed. Were you an essential worker? Did you go each day to work at a grocery store to keep your neighbors fed and keep yourself from being evicted, even though you didn't sign up for hazard duty? Did you go to a post office or shipping center to keep your neighbors from running out of supplies, while you yourself barely had any? Did you go to a hospital or a doctor's office to keep your neighbors healthy, without enough personal protective equipment to provide the same health and safety for yourself? Or did you shelter in place, at home alone, or at a home filled with screens, desperate for things to do, to escape those four walls, not sure when you'd be able to work again, not sure if you'd be able to pay the rent, not sure if the world as you knew it would ever open up again? They will ask questions about all the little quirks in our behavior in our society that were born during the pandemic. They will ask questions about the specifics of how we rode out a pandemic that brought the most powerful nations in human history to a grinding halt. But they will also have more difficult questions for those of us who lived through this pandemic. It may take time for them to put these questions into words and find the courage to ask them. But they will find it, and we had better be ready to answer. They will wonder why so many black people suffered and died during the pandemic. They will ask us if there was a genetic component to this vulnerability, or if it really was just because our society had so little value for black lives and spewed the worst pollution into black communities, and burned gentrification and redlining and environmental racism into black lungs, and fostered such racial inequalities that even a space alien who knew nothing of our culture would recognize the institutional racism by the sheer number of deaths endured by people of color, black, brown, indigenous communities during the pandemic. They will wonder why white Americans didn't believe that black Americans couldn't breathe until they literally stopped breathing. They will wonder why the airline industry and the fossil fuel industry and other wealthy and powerful industries received trillions of dollars in government aid, while millions of Americans suddenly found themselves unemployed, unable to pay the rent, unable to put food on the table, unsure of what to do next, unimpressed by a one-time stimulus check that they may or may not receive, that may or may not be enough to provide them with food, shelter, health care, the basics they needed to get a new start in life. They will wonder why members of Congress didn't choose to pass a stimulus package that truly helped people doing the essential work, living in the frontline communities, rather than propping up the same predatory institutions that contributed to the crisis in the first place. They will wonder why the American people didn't use this great pause and the next pauses that followed as an opportunity to change everything, to provide health care for everyone, to enact a Green New Deal, to demand that every aspect of our society that had been shut down by the pandemic could only reopen once it had brought itself into alignment with climate justice, racial justice, economic justice, peace and justice for all people in all lands. Or maybe, just maybe, they will wonder if you and I were among the millions of people who demanded such things. Maybe, just maybe, they will wonder if we were among the many who participated in the online agitation, the grassroots campaigning, the boycotts and divestments, the mass demonstrations, the general strikes, the surge of popular actions inside and outside of ballot boxes that changed everything for the better. Children who grew up after this pandemic will wonder what it was like to be alive when most of the world shut down. The choices we make today will determine whether they're wondering about the past from the comfort of a resilient community founded in principles of mutual aid, just peace, just transition, or the smoldering ruins of a world that never recovered from the multiplying threats of pandemics and climate crisis. If we work together through mutual aid to support each other and create a better world, then today's children will grow up wondering just how bad the world would have been if we hadn't come together to do the impossible and change everything during the great pause to make space for the beloved community that was born in its wake.